Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative McGovern, for holding this special hour to discuss the dangers of nuclear weapons. You know, when I first entered Congress, I was the third PhD physicist elected to this body. We had at the time Vern Ehlers, a nuclear physicist and a conservative religious Republican representing Western Michigan. We had Rush Holt, a plasma fusion physicist, a progressive Democrat representing Princeton. And we had me, a sort of garden variety Democrat who spent the last 25 years smashing protons and antiprotons together to make particles that have not been around since the Big Bang. And although our politics were quite different, we were united by a special responsibility to join the discussion about nuclear weapons and ask what we can do to strengthen global nuclear security and maintain U.S. leadership in trying to prevent nuclear war. One area where we were always in violent agreement was to stop wasting money on Star Wars, which was then rebranded the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiatives, and is now rebranded Golden Dome. For more than 45 years, scientists have been patiently explaining to policymakers that this is never going to work. It is easy to overwhelm with a trivial response to it. We have spent over $200 billion on it. We have never tested it once against the kind of countermeasures that any competent opponent would deploy. And even if we succeed at stopping ballistic missiles, there are unfortunately many other ways to deliver nuclear weapons that we can never stop. And so this thing is deeply, I guess stupid is not too strong a word. When you explain something to someone in a variety of terms again and again, and they just don't want to hear it because they think it messages so well, wouldn't it be great if we had this magic golden dome or whatever you want to call it, that would stop nuclear weapons? Yeah, it would be great, but if it is an impossibility to do the fundamental physics of it, then we should stop talking about it, and we should certainly stop wasting money on it. Another place where we were always in strong agreement was how we should be strengthening the non-proliferation efforts at our national laboratories. Our national labs create an underlying foundation for all of our nuclear security efforts, including the non-proliferation and national security priorities that we're talking about here today. In order to ensure that current and future arms control efforts are properly fulfilling their mission, we have to invest in our scientific workforce to maintain our leadership in verification efforts. You know, it's not well known, certainly among members of Congress, but when the IEA sends inspectors into Iran, into countries of concern, those have been largely trained by the national labs in the United States. And when we gut the non-proliferation capacities of our national labs, or simply allow them to retire, as has been happening, we risk putting aside one of the most powerful tools we have to actually enforce any deal that we may get. You know, the president's very fond of talking about this deal he's going to get on Iran nuclear. We listened to him talk about how he was going to get North Korea. You know, I support efforts to try doing that, but if we ever succeed at getting one of these deals, we are going to need, for sure, to have experts we trust that can go in there and make sure nobody's cheating. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is the gutting of those budgets and that capacity because it doesn't satisfy the MAGA worldview, I guess. And over the years, I've focused my attention on a few specific areas to strengthen our nuclear security architecture. One of them is what's called a nuclear. Well, it's the business. It has a number of names, but the question is, if for some reason a nuclear weapon is detonated somewhere in the United States or anywhere around the world, the president will come under huge pressure to say, who did that? Whose weapon was it? There is a lot of very detailed knowledge that we have had in the past in our national labs to be able to go in there, do what's called nuclear forensics, and find out whether that was a bomb from X, Y, or Z. And that capacity has been under duress for a long time, and it seems like it's every single time the appropriations budgets come up, we end up having to try to defend that. And that's something that's completely irrelevant until it's the most important question in the world. Who did that? Who let off this nuclear weapon? And how do we make sure we don't retaliate against the wrong person or entity that did that? So first, and there are a number of other things I've been working on. First and foremost is HRES 100. It's a resolution that I introduced in the House with 19 other members, supporting arms control and condemning Russia's purported suspension of its participation in the New START treaty. The current extension of the New START is set to expire in under a year, and anyone who remembers previous arms control negotiations will know that there's almost no time left to negotiate a subsequent treaty. Additionally, any negotiations, whether with Russia, China, or any other country, will require partners who are willing to have discussions on arms control, which is something that's far easier said than done. This is not something where the two great men leading great nations can come together and strike a deal. The details matter, and you have to have technical experts that you trust going deep down into the weeds to have an agreement that they will come back to you and say, yeah, this is a solid agreement that we can trust. And it's a time when traditional channels of dialogue on arms control and strategic stability have been closed or quiet, and we're going to rely more than ever on keeping alternative channels open and keeping the expertise in place so when the time comes for these agreements, we have people we trust that can carry them out. Non-governmental organizations, scientists, and research institutions have kept this dialogue open even during the worst parts of the Cold War, and we're going to need to rely on them to fulfill these roles again. Another crucial institution that we must continue to support in these times is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. We're already seeing the incredibly hard work that Director General Grossi and his staff are putting in to responding to the Russian invasion of Ukraine with its many nuclear reactors and the myriad of other crises on their doorstep. Which brings us to Iran. One of the proudest moments in my career was standing alongside Dr. Richard Garwin, who, as Representative McGovern mentioned, often pointed to as the father of the hydrogen bomb. And a strong advocate for nuclear nonproliferation. He stood by my side along with Energy Secretary Dr. Ernie Moniz as I announced my support for the Iran nuclear deal. And one of the tragedies of the recent past has been this president's abandonment of the Iran nuclear deal, which has gotten us into a heck of a pickle. As predicted by the people who actually understood what our true options were in that negotiation. After the U.S. bombing of Iran, there's been an immense amount of debate about whether or not Iran's nuclear program was set back by a certain amount of time, whether it's years or whatever. But the level of technical ignorance that has been displayed by this administration is frankly frightening. They have access to the best weapons designers in the world, and either they're not listening to them or not asking their questions. Because when you hear Secretary Rubio, for example, saying, oh, don't worry about their 60% enriched uranium inventory because they're going to have to convert it to metal, and that will take us years. Anyone with a knowledge of the history of the Manhattan Project knows that is not a major activity. Iran has done it for a long time. They now know how to do it. And if you're only interested in converting from uranium hexafluoride to metal, a few tens of kilograms, which is what you need for your first weapon and set of weapons, this happens in a laboratory. It can happen in a congressional office. You don't need a big space for this. The conversion of the uranium hex to what's called green salt and the green salt to metal is something that happens in a small industrial building that can happen anywhere in any city in Iran and will be really hard to tell. So we have not prevented them from doing what they have to do. And the enrichment level is another thing where we're seeing, frankly, technically ignorant statements made. You know, we have 3 levels of uranium. There's the less than 20% is generally regarded as relatively safe, can be used in reactors with without a lot of safeguards. Then when you get above 90% enriched uranium, that's the good stuff for really high performance weapons. But what about in between? They have 60% uranium. Guess what? That is not weapons grade, but it is weapons usable. For example, the Hiroshima bomb. The Hiroshima bomb was made with a mixture of 50% enriched uranium and higher enriched uranium. The 60% enriched uranium that Iran has a significant inventory of is perfectly usable even for a simple Hiroshima-style gun-type device. And when our leadership speaks in ignorance, apparent ignorance of that fact, you know, beating their chest and saying we set them back by decades, whereas in fact that's not the case. And this uranium hexafluoride, just to give you a sense of the scale, the 400 kilograms that the IEA watched them enrich to 60%, that is stored conventionally in the United States in about 25 scuba tank-sized pressurized containers. Any 5 of those scuba tanks have enough uranium to make a Hiroshima-style nuclear weapon. And these things are not hard to smuggle. We'll have a hard time convincing ourselves, in fact, that the Iranians already haven't done it. All right, and so just pretending like Iran does not have a credible threat here and has no leverage is a dangerous and ignorant position for our government to be taking, and one of the scariest things about the many threats that we face right now. You know, for those of you who don't know, actually you should go look at the Wikipedia article on the Hiroshima little boy bomb, and you will see a lot of and the references in it. You know, it's unfortunately very well documented over the years because it's not the best weapon you can make by far. You can make much more complex and inefficient weapons, but the Iranians don't have to do that. If they simply want to replicate what was done, you get an old, 155 millimeter howitzer, you replace the explosive shell with some enriched, 60% enriched will work just fine uranium, you shoot it into the right shaped target, and you've got something that's as effective as the Hiroshima weapon. You know, this is not a trivial risk, and the only answer to this is negotiations, and we have to get very serious about that. It's not something that the Iranians even have to test. We did not test the Hiroshima weapon before we sent it. It was just obviously going to work. The physics hasn't changed in the 80 years since then, and so we're at a very uncertain position on that, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. We've also recently been hearing a lot of calls about the resumption of nuclear testing. This is particularly worrying because the move away from nuclear testing has been really it's one of the cornerstone successes of non-proliferation and nuclear security. But just think of all the attention Donald Trump could get by giving the order that he wants to blow off a nuclear weapon just to make sure it works or whatever it is. You get a lot of attention that way. But our country has a tremendous amount to lose if everyone begins nuclear testing again. The U.S. during the Cold War conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests, far more than any other country, and we had much better instrumentation, knowing exactly what happened in those explosions. And that knowledge that we gained has allowed our nation to maintain the safety, security, and effectiveness of our nuclear stockpile without any further testing. And if we were to resume testing, the rest of the world would resume testing. I'm sure they all have bomb designers that are just chomping at the bit to get more data on exactly what happens if they explode one of their untested weapons. If we do this, we would be giving away the most significant strategic advantage that our country has, which is this huge database of exactly what works and what does not work in detailed and very technologically aggressive designs for our nuclear weapons. So if we open that Pandora box, every country which is nuclear capable will will say this is our opportunity to become co-equal with the United States in knowledge of nuclear weapons, and that will be yet another disaster for the proliferation regime. So, the next few years are going to be crucial to making sure that the world we live in remains safe from the threat of nuclear weapons. And again, I thank you, Representative McGovern, for bringing us together to discuss this. And
I thank the gentleman from Illinois for his